thank Katie Sellinger and Noah Burke, who are the president and vice president of the AU College Republicans, who helped us put some of this programming together and got us questions from their membership. And we really love working with them. So I know they're watching today. So days after the Democrats nominated Joe Biden in an all-digital convention like no other in history, but Republicans will be looking to energize their own base and bid for much sought-after undecided voters as they hold their own part digital, part in-person convention to officially nominate President Donald Trump as their 2020 candidate. This year, no more than 336 delegates, the 2016 convention had more than 2,400, will gather in person in Charlotte, North Carolina to conduct the roll call vote and formally nominate Trump, who faced little opposition in the primary season. The 4-day convention, which runs from this Monday, August 24th to the 27th, will center around an overarching theme of honoring the great American story and will feature everyday Americans who will testify that the president has positively affected their lives, according to the campaign. Our speakers today are incredible individuals. They are friends of Sine. We love always getting their expertise. First, we have Anita McBride, who is the executive in residence at the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies here at the School of Public Affairs at American University in Washington, D.C. She directs programming and national conferences on the legacies of America's First Ladies, the First Ladies Initiative. We encourage you to check these programs out. And she was also in White House service, had spanned 2 decades and 3 presidential administrations, previously serving as assistant to President George W. Bush and chief of staff to First Lady Laura Bush. Welcome, Anita. So nice to see you, even if virtually. She's joined today by Susan Molinari, who has certainly a wide-ranging background resulting from her multidisciplinary service in the leadership of the United States Congress as Vice President of Google's Public Affairs for the America and as leader of multiple offices for international public affairs and lobbying. I just want to thank you, Susan. Susan, most importantly, I think, was a Sine Institute Fellow in the spring of 2020. The students adored having her with us. Susan, welcome to the program and welcome back to the Sine Institute. We love having you here. And last but not least, another incredible Sine Institute Fellow, Alfonso Jackson. He is the Chief Executive A.R. Jackson Advisors, LLC. He has decades of experience in housing and community development. And in 2012, he served as Vice Chairman of Consumer and Community Banking at JP Morgan Chase in New York City. But prior to that, he has served as distinguished lecturer and university professor in Hampton University, and was appointed the 13th Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in March of 2004, nominated by President George W. Bush. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you.
It's so good to see you all. We haven't been able to see you, but virtually, but you know, like I said, a friend of Sine. I want to get right into this. We're going to have so many questions. We have so many questions that came in for the audience. I just want to remember everybody to, remind everybody we're doing this Facebook Live. Please share this with your network so we could get more people doing this. Send in questions. We'll try to get to as many of them as as possible in person, and we're just going to have a great conversation. So I just want to start off with just a brief intro from both of you. You've all had certainly experiences in Republican presidential politics, certainly served presidents, worked with Republicans in Congress. I'd love to hear from all of you a little bit about your convention experience. Anita, do you want to start us off with what convention, maybe even what was the first one?
Sure. Well, the first convention, thank you very much, Amy, first of all, for including me on this. It's a great way to kick off the week. So the first convention that I went to was in 1984 in Dallas. The Reagan-Bush re-elect. I was a campaign volunteer and then staffer, and so went down there, and it was incredibly exciting, of course, for a young person to have that opportunity. I think it really solidified, of course, my interest in politics, and the experiences that followed, of course, were terrific for me over the 2 decades that you mentioned. But I've been to every convention since 1984 except for 2. And I, as a volunteer, as a staff member, as a guest, as when I was with Mrs. Bush as her chief of staff in 2008, of course, I took her around to all of the events that she was asked to speak at, including the things that she did jointly with Mrs. McCain at that time. And then in 2012 and 16, I was doing things for American University there, who was on the ground at both conventions, doing events with alumni in the area, and also doing a lot of political commentator work from the floor, and that was great fun. So anyway, it does feel strange to not be there, but in some ways I feel a lot more connected to be able to see it cover to cover through the media, just like I watched the DNC last week.
Well, and I want to thank you for your comments, but Anita, I also left out the best part. You were on our advisory board at the Sine Institute, so I lean on you all the time too. So true Sine members here today. So thank you for your service on the board as well. Susan, you've had some interesting experiences with conventions. Do you want to share with us? We're so glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. It's good to see everybody. I, like Anita, my first convention was in 1984. At the time, I was working for the Republican National Committee. And so was, doing all the sort of gopher work and running around, but was really excited to be there. Had not missed a Republican convention since, including, and especially in 1996, I was keynote speaker for Bob Dole. Funny little story there. When you go to do your keynote speech, at those days you'd stand at a podium and your speech would be there, and the podium would never move, but they would adjust. You'd go in a few days before and they would adjust the ground beneath you. So like a little block would come up so that you could see the teleprompters wouldn't move, but you'd be able to read them. And they would practice you on teleprompters so you didn't look shifty, right? So you spent so much time those days, teleprompters were kind of new. Well, John Kasich went before me and got really excited. And so he ran over. So they didn't have time to adjust my flooring. So when I got there, I couldn't see the teleprompter. It wasn't set up for me.
For those who don't know, Susan, you're petite little lady,
right. So the thing was off. So you're giving the biggest speech of your life. Also at the same time, Pat Buchanan's people staged a walkout on me. I could hear them coming. I was right up against 11 o'clock. And so I knew I couldn't say like, hey, technical difficulties, can we take a break? I had my written notes there, but what an
oh my gosh, that would have been totally a nerve-wracking moment and a big time.
But then I went to, when I was at Google, I got to go to both we would do events at both the Republican and Democratic convention. And then, just this year, I virtually attended the Democratic convention speaking on behalf of Joe Biden. So been there and back.
Yeah, that's what I mean. You've been to several conventions, different perspectives, right? So, Alfonso, it's so good to see you again. I haven't seen you on campus. It's so difficult not to see you wandering around and talking to students, but welcome back virtually. We've never taught conventions, so I'm kind of curious what your experience has been with conventions.
Well, thank you very much, Amy. My experience started in '84 too. Oh. I went to the Democratic convention in San Francisco. That's when I became a Republican. And I left the convention.
So literally a convention helped you on that journey.
Well, it convinced me that the party had left my perspective and there was nothing they could do to convince me they hadn't. And then I met two of my very best friends even today. I've known them sometime. Clarence Thomas and Larry Thompson were coming to the Dallas convention, and I'm from Dallas. And I got a chance to end up going to the Republican convention, and Ronald Reagan convinced me to become a Republican at that convention. Then when President 41 was selected to be the party nominee, George W. Bush, I don't call him that anymore, I call him president, invited me to be with he and the First Lady, and Marcy and I spent time with them at the convention. And they treated us like real stars, I guess. And then when President Bush was running, I was the vice chair of his campaign, both when he was governor and when he was running for president. And I was the assistant secretary for the convention at that time. And then when he was up for re-election, what occurred is I began to talk to a number of the groups from each state. It was myself and Carl. That's very unique because Carl is a very good friend, but he always told people that Marcy was his girlfriend and she was just married to me. So that's been my, and then after that, I have not been to any more conventions because I was at Chase as vice chairman, and we were not permitted to do that. And and then now, just looking at this from afar, and I agree with Anita. It's good to be looking at this from afar, not in it. So there's no question.
It's interesting. I think for a lot of us, we are having the experience of attending almost both conventions in some ways, which some of us would not. So, you know,
Right.
What incredible experiences. I mean, for each and every one of you. I guess the big thing though, that I think you can bring perspective to is sometimes people see the speeches, but they don't realize actual work goes on at these conventions beyond the speeches. I mean, we have a party platform that they have to adopt. Caucuses and councils meet, state party chairs meet. There's things going on behind the scenes. So what's your perspective of how that's going to happen this year, or you know, your experience with how things like that got done? Especially, Susan, let's start with you. You worked for the RNC, so you saw that, you know, inner working, but people don't always realize it's more than just the speech.
Oh, there's something that is going on, you know, 24 hours almost in addition to what you're seeing on the screen. And it is, you're right, there's fundraisers. There's, you know, those meetings where the states will meet with their elected officials. It's the time for some of the larger states to talk to the vice presidential candidates. There's arguments. There's always just, there's media that's going on. So there's just you know, so much that's going on. And when you work for the RNC, right, your job is to make sure, you know, does the media have everything that they need? You know, is there trouble going on there? Where are our speakers? You know, sometimes some of the people who attend conventions think they need special care and feeding, maybe one or two. And make sure that, you know.
She's not talking about you, Alfonso. Don't worry.
No, the least. But, you know, you have to make sure that, you know, the major donors have everything that they need. Are the seats correct? You know, it's just, and then, you know, with the last time, and you never know what's going to happen, right? At the last Republican convention, Ted Cruz, you know, got booed. And so it's not as much what happens on the floor anymore because so much is decided ahead of time. But there is an energy, I think, that comes with these conventions. And in addition to everything that's going on behind the scenes, you know, having people who come from all over the world, all over the country, and save up for this and get together with their state delegations. And, you know, I always remember Texas in their red, white, and blue and their hats. And, you know, when they vote, they're hoo-ha. And there's something so innocent in a field like politics that you see at a convention when everybody's all together and joined by one aspect of just believing in democracy, right? They're there because they really believe in democracy. And you feel that both conventions. It's just, it'll be interesting to see how we move forward.
Right. Alfonso, what do you remember from, you know, the inside workings review?
I think Susan has described it really well. That's why the Democratic convention, I looked at it maybe 40 minutes and I thought it was extremely dull. So I didn't look at it for the rest. So that's why I'm pleased that Rona, who runs the RNC, is trying to bring people in, more people, so you can have the kind of vibe. You won't ever have the vibes that you had at those other conventions. But you can have something if you have people listening to you or interacting in some ways. So we'll see how this turns out. But to me, I'm still pretty old-fashioned about doing it the way we did it in the past, not this newfangled way for either party.
Right. And Anita, you walking around a first lady, I mean, she must have had several roles at that convention. I mean,
you know, and as Susan was talking, it really made me think about a couple of things that were, you know, were important, but also a big headache for anyone that's orchestrating or overseeing or managing such a large scale event like a convention, because there are so many pieces and so many things going on. And of course, one of the big issues is taking care of your delegates. I mean, that is the role of the conventions, right? Is the actual nomination of a candidate. And, you know, two of the biggest headaches for anyone organizing a convention are credentials and hotel room. And none of those issues really are a problem, you know, this time. But, you know, and that's a loss of economic, you know, value to a city that's hosting this. But, you know, that is definitely a big part of it. And I think the other is, in terms of you asking me about Mrs. Bush, truly one of my most favorite experiences at a convention was in 2008. That was not, an easy time. First of all, as Alfonso would remember, President Bush was not welcome to the convention.
Right.
It was a hurricane that was coming through the United States. It affected us even in Minneapolis, St. Paul. The rains were horrible. Laura Bush was invited to come. She did go. We were just doing everything off the cuff. I mean, she had a joint event with Mrs. McCain, which was interesting. They did a joint interview on the stage at the convention. They did some service projects, events together, packaging supplies for those being affected by the hurricane. Not things that you normally would think about at a convention. But what was the best memory for me of all the conventions I've been to was I said to Mrs. Bush, we just have to go wherever they need us. So we're going to tear up whatever schedule you had. And what we did was go to all of these all the state delegation breakfasts. We didn't have really a lot of staff with us, but people from different whether it was Minnesota, or whether it was Virginia, or whether it was Florida, whatever state it was, they would say, we'd like Mrs. Bush to come here. And we would just work with the Secret Service and get in the car and run to that hotel, to that delegation breakfast. And she would appear and say a few words, and it would be great. And it was truly the most nimble experience that I've had with her, managing a principal and managing their schedule. Alfonso knows, Susan knows, is not an easy thing to do. It's highly scripted. When they're a protectee, you've got the Secret Service that have to be involved. They were so incredible. They would move agents from place to place. We barely gave them 20, 30 minutes notice. But what it reminded me of, these are what we were talking about in the green room before this. These are grassroots events. These are the people, these delegates that come in. They have saved their money for 4 years to be able to afford to go there. They are the ones conducting the business of a convention, and showing up and waving the flag and saying thank you for your work on behalf of the party was by far the most memorable experience I ever had.
It's so important that you bring that up, Anita, because in this way, this always started out as a party meeting for both parties, right? And from the very beginning, it was they've got a couple of responsibilities. You're going to nominate your candidate and solidify that. You're going to execute on your party platform. For the RNC, they also have often had meetings to adjust their rules for the next party, nomination process. The DNC has always done a commission afterward or whatnot, but there's business that happens. What's really interesting to me, and Alfonso, you kind of mentioned this, a little bit of a one-dimensional, like it's without having people in the room. It's become a media event. So the media used to count on talking to the delegates, talking to the state, but they're losing a little bit of those conversations as well, not being in person. I think I'm going to start out with Susan, because you've been a journalist too. Like, how is the media not getting some parts of the convention they usually get because it's not in person?
I think that's a great question. I mean, that was a significant portion of what they would do, right? It wasn't, they would cover the speeches, but then it would always be, what was your reaction? They'd go into the crowd. Why are you here? What do you think about the presidential pick, right? That was really, you're right, the bulk of the story were the people who were there. And I think at this point, they don't really have that opportunity. They may have the opportunity a little bit more at the Republican convention, but clearly when things are virtual,
we've seen so many times, like their reference to Delegate A or Delegate B or, whoever, and what they're talking about. You mentioned media too, Anita, was there a lot of press interviews that you had to do? I mean, they really wanted access to party leaders, delegates, like.
Sure. And even, in the my post White House years conventions that I went to in 2012 and 2016, that really was the bulk of what I did. I mean, even in AU had, through their media affairs and to AU Comms, set up a host of interviews with Radio Row. That's at every
Radio Row. We don't have that. Yeah,
one to the next to the next, and then on the floor, and interviews on the floor. And then also one of the things that I did too was help International Republican Institute, which had been charged with organizing the foreign delegations, the foreign ambassadors that come to view the conventions, and they go to both conventions. That's always a struggle.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you're cutting out for a minute there. Yeah.
Giving up.
So Alfonso, let me ask you, because Anita mentioned, with her interaction with, the First Lady and those
They're
interviews.
cabling back home to their
Oh, yes.
what the foreign policy projections potentially are, engagement.
So that's another aspect of, you were mentioning inner workings that aren't happening. Alfonso, did you experience any interaction with the media? Were they looking for, or were you more behind the scenes, watching it unfold?
And in effect, too much media for me. As I told Donnie Evans, who was the chairman, we were sitting at the end of the night about 11:30 or 12 having a drink. And I told him, I said, it would be nice if tomorrow doesn't come. So, and they ask you the same questions over and over. Yeah. And you basically memorizes the lines and just said, this is what I'm going to say. And you stay to that position. And so I enjoyed it, but by the third day, you're very tired because you're working all day, interacting with people. Because even before I became the secretary, I interacted with a lot of the state delegation people. As I said, both Carl and I did, and in 2004, the very same thing. And then we had a real, as you know, the 2000 election was seriously, so I was spoken to, I think, probably a number of times by the press as to whether I believe that the president had won. Of course he won, because we served 4 years. Yeah. But in the final analysis, I would not like to go back through that again. It was good the first time around, but that's the way I said to the prior administration when they talked to me about coming in. I said, I've already been secretary. I don't need to be secretary anymore. So.
Well, Alfonso, we learned what you don't miss about the conventions. What do you miss about not attending in person this year if you were going to go?
I don't miss it at all. See, as Anita will tell you, I had a very unique experience with President Bush. President Bush and the First Lady were our neighbors. And Barbara Jenner grew up with our daughter, Leslie. So we had a real tremendous friendship because we used to, when he was running the Rangers before he became governor, we used to jog every morning. And so he'd come by our house and have coffee with Marcia, but I don't drink coffee, so I'd wait and stretch. So it was very unique. It was, the great thing is he was my friend, and I felt a tremendous obligation to him to do everything to get him elected governor and president. So I look back on it with great fond memories. I just think it was the greatest thing that happened to me in my life. One of the greatest.
Yeah, such a unique experience. Susan, I got to ask you, I will be honest, what I miss is walking out of the convention, space and getting those great t-shirts and buttons you can only get outside the convention. It's the same way for the RNC and the DNC, right? But what do you
Although Anita reminded me of that you were trading, you'd be like, okay, I'll give you, your tickets for Thursday night. Can you give me 2 for Wednesday night? My boss is like, you just wheeled and dealed. Those tickets or invitations to this party, or my boss is coming in, I need to get him into this. I'll give you 3 delegate tickets, right? I mean, you were just, it's like, I forgot how much.
A lot of horse trading.
To, make sure that the people you were taking care of, taking care of there. And of course it's all, it's the credentials, it's the t-shirts, it's the silly hats. As I said before, there's just kind of this innocence that comes along with bringing people from all over the country who are happy to be there, except when, I'm sure the Democrats are the same way. In the Republican convention, if you came from a state that wasn't supportive necessarily, like isn't going to go. You were in 3 states over for your hotel.
Exactly.
Right.
So, like coming from New York, the New York delegation for Republicans was always like 5 states over.
Somebody explained it to me. It is like a big, like Irish family, and the states are all like siblings. And you never say anything bad about the family, but like, boy, you can fight with your siblings, right? And that's kind of similar.
Right,
But
exactly.
yeah,
I think
somebody
that's-
mentioned to me it's like a big family reunion too. I mean,
Sure, definitely.
I think Susan hit the point. I remember one incident that I had given a couple of friends some tickets for the second night, and I was bombarded by 15 other people. And now you should always tell the person that you give the tickets to not to open their mouth.
Don't tell them where you got this.
Don't tell them where you got the tickets
never admit.
Do you know, Amy, can I mention one thing that really is a big difference about conventions that really over time? I mean, 2000 was the last convention in Philadelphia where we didn't have this extraordinary level of security with perimeters pushing things out so incredibly far, making access so much more difficult. And because it was pre 9/11, and so every convention after that of 2004 in New York, if you remember, those of you that were there, the chutes that you had to go down on the streets, it was the only access you could have to Madison Square Garden, and it has got increasingly more difficult ever since. And the gates that look like cages, they're keeping people out, and the perimeters are so far. And so if, like Susan says, you're a delegation from a state that isn't necessarily, so supportive of the party, then your hotel is already so far away, and you have to plan hours to get there and to get back. And so for organizing a convention under those circumstances, the logistics are incredible. The transportation issues become even more important than the access to to passes on the floor, which is unbelievable when you think about it. So I really, give credit to, prior directors of conventions from 2000 forward, how they manage that. No one is ever 100% happy, but it's an extraordinary undertaking under those circumstances. So that's what's made this convention, Lisa Dacey last week, and I hope too for the RNC, that people will watch the remarks and watch the speeches, because they have access to it in a way that they really haven't had before in the last 20 years.
I think that's such a good point. I mean, when I was running site selection for the city, it's funny how that became the top. It was security, it was finances, it was experience, making sure people had a good experience. But security was at the top of and some cities were just, unfortunately, they were pushed out of the running just because they couldn't get that perimeter.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've got a question from one of our Facebook audience I'd love to mention. So I think it kind of plays off of that, because Raphael is asking, from an insider's perspective, how does the relationship between staff of the convention and staff of the principals work? There's so many staff and volunteers there. Not just the convention is very stressful. So I'm wondering, I think, some of you have firsthand, maybe we'll go to Susan a little bit to say, there you are working for the party, but then you also have to deal with the campaign. So what was that like? That's a good question.
No, it's a great question, because even though we're all together, that will break it apart a bit, right? You have your constituencies, and sometimes your constituencies, you have to say, no, he's going to sit there or she's going to sit here. Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. And a lot of times too, you have people who are working the conventions, not putting it all together, who are very young, right? They're just delighted to be there, but they may not know the importance of an individual, or where they are in terms of political importance, fundraising importance. So I mean, there is a lot of chaos that comes about as you're trying to make this all happen. But at the end, it all just comes together and everybody just sort of throws in. But yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yeah.
my boss needs to sit there, and my boss wants to say hi to so-and-so, and yeah.
And
No,
I
I'm
don't think
sorry.
people realize the sheer volume of the number of people that are
the number of people. And it used to be that you could, have a lot more access around.
Okay, are you guys ready for some tough questions from our AU College Republicans? They're good. They're good. Let me give you, no, but seriously, Katie and Noah went to them with some questions, and I think they're really thoughtful. The first question from one of our students is, even after 4 years with Trump in the White House, the RNC is adopting the same platform from the 2016 convention. So what does that indicate about the state of the Republican Party? I think it's a good question. Like, what's the evolution of the platforms, and do you think there's a big change in the Republican platform today? Does anybody want to take that?
No change really from
No.
last time, 4 years ago, and which, indicates really the control that President Trump has over the party right now. And I think there is one thing that was interesting, though, that I noticed that the platform committee adopted in a resolution last night was, and Susan will appreciate this because she's Italian American like I am, but our country is going through a huge debate on honoring figures of our past, including Christopher Columbus. And the resolution from the RNC last night was incredibly strong in support of honoring explorers and, courageous figures of our history, and measuring them not by today's standards. And that is really, it was very interesting. I can't say I'm surprised because the president's been very vocal about this issue anyway, but which is a stark contrast to the pressure that I think the Democratic platform, they could not put a message like this out. For heaven's sake, the Speaker of the House is the single most important Italian American in the country, and she herself publicly said she doesn't care what happens to the statues. That was may seem minor, but it sort of tells you something about where they're coming from.
I think Anita hit it, really described it really well. What I said to one of my friends who is on the Democratic side, what difference does it make as it relates to Christopher Columbus and Jefferson? It's not going to change my life. I'm not going to worry about that. I think there are critical issues that we should worry about, and that's not one of them. Now, as it relates to the Confederate soldiers that occurred after the war was over with, I think that's a different situation. But you have to, I just believe as a constitutional professor that our founding fathers were very bright when they created the Constitution. And why I said that is because they made sure that our Constitution could be amended. And in the final analysis, yes, they were slave owners, but the point is we can't overlook history. I just really think that's a mistake. And I agree with Anita when they said, Christopher Columbus didn't discover America, but he sure made a lot of contributions to America, because we wouldn't have the country today if it wasn't for him in many cases, I believe.
That's a really good analysis. And Alfonso asked the question, which is another question from one of our students: who is the target audience for this RNC conversation? Is it about firing up at the base? Is it intended to reach out to independents and convince undecided voters? And might this change throughout the convention? But in your experience, maybe we'll start with Susan, who are these conventions for? Like we're broadcasting them, we're getting these speakers out, who are they trying to talk to this week?
I would say, and I'm trying not to show my bias this year, but I would say typically what a convention tries to do is fire up the base, right? You always keep your eye on the base. but also try and expand that base a bit. So, trying to, like when Dole asked me to speak and Kay Bailey spoke and Christy Todd Whitman, there clearly was a focus on trying to bring in women, to a higher visibility. But I know that sounds so silly now, but, back then we just weren't a lot of participants in conventions. So I think that was the idea. I think, the Democrats tried to do that, bringing in some Republicans, trying to, find that sweet spot of what I think they said to 5 to 10% of voters who have to go one way or the other that are actually going to decide the election. So it's always kind of a dance between making sure you observe, honor, and applaud your base, and at the same time try and do some outreach. It'll be curious to see how the Republicans do that, because that has not been the president's MO. But I will bet that during the convention that the people who are putting the convention together will have speakers and stories. I mean, I know, like, for example, Alice Johnson, is not, would not be a typical speaker at a Republican convention for Donald Trump, except for the fact that, he really was a champion on prison reform and got her out of a life sentence. And so, that would be, an attempt to try and broaden the base, I bet.
Mm.
Do you agree with that, Anita? Like from
I do. I agree with Susan completely. And I think the challenge for this convention this week for the president and all of the surrogates that they have speaking is really getting the point across of what he has accomplished over these last 3+ years. Because with all the chaos sort of surrounding the daily governance out of the White House, I'm sorry to say that, the message, the accomplishments, the metrics are easily lost. And this is an opportunity in this week. I hope that they will seize on with some of the speakers that they have coming out, helping to get to a more granular level where the successes have been on the policy front, so that the base, like Susan says, is reminded why they voted for him and why they should stay with him, that he sought to accomplish these things and these are the things that he did. And then the crossover to some new voters, like the story, of the Alice Johnson. I think that that's really important. At the list that I went, through, there are some, examples of people that are facing the crises of our time, right? The nurse practitioner that's volunteered to go work in a COVID, a high rate COVID area. I think those are we need to be reminded of the goodness of American people. It's the everyday sort of heroes that don't need to be told by the government to go do something to help. I think what will be interesting is the response to some of the African Americans running for office on the Republican ticket, because some of them have really taken a hit for doing that. Vernon Jones in Georgia is one of them. So that will be interesting. Will that appeal to more African American voters who are not necessarily supportive of President Trump, but see that he's encouraged a new generation of voter African Americans to support him? I don't know. It remains to be seen.
I think one of the things to look at, people said that our present president is so narcissistic. I think anybody who runs for president and wins is narcissistic.
Have ego.
There's no question about it. You've got to think you're better than everybody else. But the key becomes this, that I have seen. He has done some exceptional things, especially when you talk about the opportunity zones. No president has ever touched that. Second of all, he has funded the historically Black colleges better than any president, not just Republican or Democrat. We could never get that done. In fact, President Obama had been in office almost 6 years before he met with the presidents of historically Black colleges. He had been in office 3 years before he ever met with the Black Caucus. Most people don't know that. So I'm saying to you, his style is not conducive to people like the president. But I look at the results. The results as it relates to Black Americans have been outstanding, especially with the opportunity zones, which are going very well now with the historically Black colleges. So he has done a lot, but at the same time, he's unique. That's all I will say.
Well, you know, I think over the years working on campaigns, one thing that I've certainly learned is you can't just be against something. You know, you have to be for something. And I will say that in the Democratic convention, I did see a good balance for who they were running against and, you know, sign up what they were against, but also offering a vision and what's for. I think the concern sometimes with the current administration, and certainly the president, is like this negative going to the negative. So Susan, how important it is that they find that balance this week, the Republicans?
But let me say this to you, Amy, which
Yes.
I think is very important. I've never seen the major media run the campaign the same as the presidential campaign. To me, it is clear they have taken sides for the last 3 years. And it's as if they're running the campaign against the president with the campaign. There's just no question. So I don't think whatever he does is going to be enough. The media is going to find the negativity.
You've got a televised, you know, virtual convention.
Right.
You have an opportunity this week to balance that positive and negative. He's chosen 4 slots and 4 nights. So my question, again, I hear what you're saying, Alfonso, but I'm going to ask Susan, can they find that balance if their key person who's speaking every single night is known to go to the negative? They have to. I mean, what do you think, Susan?
Well, I think, you know, look, I think that's why a lot of us, one of the reasons why a lot of us are dissatisfied, because in going to the negative, it's not just a negative, it's dividing, right? It's the negative is somebody out there is to blame, somebody out there is coming to get you. Hey, suburban housewives, you know, wait do you see what your neighborhood's going to look like under Cory Booker? Like it's just imposing fear. And so what they need to do at this convention is, yes, I mean, look, you have to define the differences between the candidates and the parties. It's absolutely true. But then I think you then also have to show what you're going to do, what's your vision for the next 4 years, particularly under these circumstances, right? We're all sitting here, and I mean this for both parties. We're sitting here with COVID. And, you know, I just read a number today, which just makes me insane. 57% of Republicans think the death totals are okay.
Yeah.
You know, like, so you're sitting there with COVID, you know, and not blaming the president, but it's something that people are going through, right? The economic issues that follow from COVID, you know, the racial unrest that's taking place throughout the country today in Wisconsin. It cannot be just a blame. It cannot be just, this is not my responsibility. It has to be not only imagine what it would be like if Biden wins. Here's my plan moving forward to deal with this. Here's what I've done, and here's my plan moving forward. And they're smart people running this convention. I think that will be a part of it. Whether they can get him to say it, I think they're absolutely essential.
True. There's more than just one speaker. And the point of that too is you definitely have your nominee, your vice presidential nominee, but you show various leaders in the Republican Party. And in a real interesting way, one of the students asked, you know, what speakers should be at the RNC this week that didn't make it on the list? I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk after the DNC convention. Why wasn't this person speaking? Is there anybody that really sticks out for you that should be, you know, speaking at the convention? Anita, you want that one?
No, that's a really good question, you know, because I really pulled the list. I sort of did a little research on each person. I kind of, you know, outside of a few, I thought this is really a good representation of what the president cares about. So in that, or where he's had an impact. So in that way, I think that's very good. What's missing, you know, maybe one of the things that I thought was effective in the Democratic convention were the non-traditional voices that you wouldn't expect to support the president. And maybe like, the John Kasichs, you know, of the world. That appeals to a number of Republicans who are on the fence. So I don't see maybe enough crossovers, but I couldn't give you a name, and I'm sorry, I should have been prepared probably.
No, this is a good question from them. I think, it is interesting because they have found a good balance, like you said, Anita, like hearing from real concerned citizens,
On safety in our neighborhoods, on people been affected by that. I think one of the interesting ones too is the young gentleman, the young boy, the Nicholas Sandman, the high school, student who, was, now we know, kind of unfairly targeted for, coming face to face with a Native American. And really the photo went around the world of them staring at each other, but the backstory was completely different. And I think that's, an example of sometimes a media run amok. And that's, that could have really ruined that kid's life. He was, 16, 17 years old when this happened. So I think, again, but then the other side of me is like, okay, that's a negative thing. Should that be at the convention? We'll have to see how he presents himself. And maybe it will be every bit as compelling as that young boy who was encouraged by Joe Biden to push through his stuttering, which I thought was the most special speech of the entire convention. Like, that's what I'm walking away with from that convention.
Although, I think, that the Alice Johnson story, I know Alice, and she is such a beautiful person. I mean, this is a woman who spent all these years in jail. And when I said to her, were you angry because you spent so many years in jail? She said, not a day. Every day.
Wow.
Like,
incredible.
God had me there to help other women in jail. Like, I held women's hands, when they were dying. I talked to. So I think that will be one of those moments that will sort of stand out. I don't know a lot of the other speakers, but I know that she is of the heart, very religious, has been through hell and back, and has just come out a more beautiful person. And I think, that's a nice bear witness story that will stay with people.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Anita, you mentioned that, because so often we take away, you think of that 2004 moment with Barack Obama's, breakout speech, but like the fact that this young man from the DNC was so influential. Susan, you talk about this woman who could be, I think the question you've both, had experience with first families, worked with first families, been close with. Do you think it's unique that so many of the Trump children are speaking, at this convention? Like, is this a good thing? Because maybe it could show their relationship.
They did it last time too. That's sort of how they introduced him as a family man. I mean, I Barbara and Jen, of course, spoke. The other Bush children for Bush 41, they didn't speak, but they all came out to the stage at the end of Barbara Bush's speech in 1992. Right. She brought all 22 members of her family out. That conveys a human side of the candidate. This is a little different, particularly with Ivanka speaking, who's now a White House advisor. So they got to be a little careful how that's perceived. There's already questions about using the White House grounds for, these events. But it's not unusual to have family members speaking. And one thing we've certainly learned about Donald Trump and his family, it is a family affair. I mean, they are in his business, they are in his government, and they are part of everything that he does. As someone who watches First Ladies, I am interested in Mrs. Trump's speech. Yes. I think that, first of all, in 2016, her speech was terrific from the heart. She went to bed thinking she had this victory and woke up to a S-storm, the next day because of the allegations of plagiarizing. I hope that was bad staff work, and that happens when you're the non-elected, official. You're not given the same amount of support. That hopefully that does not, I know that won't happen to her this time. So I hope that,
well, I think you bring up a great point. They might not have been official speakers on there, but you saw in memory, Beau Biden, the role he played, certainly, Hunter, those grandchildren. It is a way to just show you know, a different side, a different character. So it'll be very interesting what they choose to speak on as well. You know, is it
Right.
about the relationship with their father, or is it about the work that they see themselves doing? So, you know, there's so many unexpecteds. And just because, you know, it is just, these become a show, like the surprise events we're told might.
Yeah, I
mean,
know. I'd
you're
love to
gonna
know
want to
even
watch.
one of the surprises.
I know. You know, Anita, you brought up a good point though, because one of the students brought it up too. How does setting the president at the White House for his convention speech affect the message it sends? And we don't have to get into whether, you know, we think it's, but like, what is that visual? How is that different than maybe being in the hall as a party leader, like giving that versus being, you know, in your day job setting, I guess?
I guess the only way I'll say, and I'll let others opine on this, but you know, that's the power of the incumbency, right? I mean,
Right.
Anybody running for re-election, even if they're not doing their speech from the grounds, there are videos, there are photos, there are things that show you as the commander-in-chief and show you as the leader of the free world, I guess, in that case. So this COVID experience, you know, has made it difficult for you know, people to travel. But I have to say, when I first heard it, I was a little uncomfortable just knowing, and Alfonso knows, with the general counsels we had at the White
right.
House, and you worry about any impropriety, particularly political versus official. So, you know, I don't know what else I can say
Well,
about that. I'd love to hear others.
I think Anita, you're absolutely correct. I think what it does, it's like a person asked me a question once: did I ever get used to going to the White House? As many times as I went, no, you never get used to it, because it's such a powerful entity in itself. Giving the speech there says, I am the leader. And I had the same perspective that Anita had. I said initially, I just don't think it's a good idea. But I can tell you it's going to me, have a real devastating effect, not in the negative sense, but in a very positive sense about what he's doing from the Rose Garden. I think that's where he's going to give it, I guess.
He's on the South Lawn. She's in the
South
Rose
Lawn.
Garden. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Using the two most iconic
That's
spaces
right.
in the White House.
That's right.
And I will say this, we could do this because of all of your experience for 3 more hours. I would keep you on our conversation for a long time, but we've got a few more minutes here. What I would really love for each of you to say what you're looking for this week as you're watching this convention. Maybe we'll start with you, Susan. Like, what are you looking to see, or what are you most, you know, wanting to see out of these 4 days?
So I think actually, you know, the most important, as he has demonstrated, he's the show. And so I think the most important thing is going to be what he's, you know, the fact that he has chosen to be on all 4 nights. How is that going to work? That's a big departure, right? You know, that he's going to be a part of it. Is he commenting on the speakers? Is he going to have his own, you know, thoughts? Is it going to be off? I mean, that's really what I'm going to be looking for, is how he's going to handle 4 nights of speech. And again, the overall tone, you know, I'm hoping that there's a softening. I'm hoping that there is, you know, more of a vision of an acknowledgement of what this country is going through, and a vision of how he's going to fix it. And yeah, you know, the testimonials are important. The one thing that this does give us an opportunity to do is to go meet the Brandons and others who would never be able to, you know, give a speech in, you know, in front of however many thousands of people, and get to where they need to be. So I think those unexpected testimonials are what we always remember. But you know, I don't care who's coming, who's going to be showing up out of thin air. This is about Donald Trump, and we're going to be what?
Donald Trump.
That's right. That's right. Alfonso, what are you most looking forward to picking apart this?
Hopefully that it will be positive. That to me is the most important thing. As I said, I didn't look at the Democratic, but when I read the paper, whether it was the New York Times or the Washington Post, everything seemed to be extremely negative. And I just think we're in a very difficult period of time right now. And I think people need hope and vision. So hopefully it's positive. That's all I'd like to see.
What about you, Anita?
Well, I think, and I agree with my esteemed colleagues completely on both sides. I think that this, period of such a difficulty and unrest for all of us, you look to the one person who, the leader of the country, that helps to pull you out of it. And I think all of us, that we all started with our experience in 1984 at a convention, and you walked out of that feeling incredibly, that it was morning in America. And, we need to feel energized about, we need to be reminded of the possibility and promise of our country, because we've been through very difficult times before. We're going to get through this. And who's the best person to lead us through? Who sparks that energy and optimism and enthusiasm? That's what we need to see. And who inspires the young, the next generation?
I don't know. I think I'm going to nominate Anita McBride.
I know. You better be careful.
Can I say one thing that I am really surprised about at this convention? And Alfonso, you're a former cabinet officer, and Susan, I know you were always conscious about ethics. I'm not comfortable with a sitting Secretary of State addressing a convention. And maybe I'm old-fashioned, and I like Secretary Pompeo very much, but the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, stay out of it, right, Alfonso?
I agree.
And he's doing this from Israel. I understand that's a foreign policy objective and success to a certain degree for the president, but this is even more than delivering the speech from the White House, which is in COVID times, maybe that's more acceptable. Those positions addressing a convention, I just am not comfortable with.
Thank you for bringing that up, Anita. I think there's so much to watch this week. I'll check in with you individually to get the little post, thoughts on this. Thank you so much for your time. One thing I will say, especially because we have so many students watching, whether you watch the Democratic convention, whether you watch the Republican convention, whether you're watching them both, you need to register to vote, and you need to vote in this election. You need to make a plan to vote. There is still time. Go to organizations like vote.org or to the US government. It'll help you explain to get registered, to make a plan to vote. No matter what, please embrace that. And the Sine Institute has information too, if you want to reach out. We just want to make sure that everybody who is eligible to vote votes in this election. Is the cornerstone of our democracy. So we want to make sure for that. I apologize to all the amazing questions we didn't get to. We'll try to answer some of them, but we enjoy you being a part of this. I encourage you, Sine Institute is going to have a lot of events during this election season. You might see these familiar faces back. I always like to invite them back. We are very proud to have them as parts of the Sine family. Please go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, get on all our social media. We really want you to stay engaged and informed. So I just want to say to all the hardworking people, my friend Katie Walsh is one of them too, all of those hard staff members who have tried to pivot 100 times to put on this convention this week. I wish you nothing but the best.
Kelly, can we please add her to that? The CEO of the convention, remarkable woman.
I'm glad you brought her name up. Thank you so much, Anita, because no matter what, you can be on one side or the other. These are thankless, hard jobs. And I think that they don't, to Susan's point, most people don't see that every day, and these people are already exhausted and they're going to have a long week. So we applaud the staff who put all these things on. So, all right. Thank you, my friends. It was good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Susan.
All right. Stay safe. I'll talk to you all soon.
Take care.
Take care.
Take care.